Daddy eats lots. Daddy eats lots. Daddy eats lots. Munch, munch, munch.
Hello and welcome to Daddy Eats Last, where we discuss the challenge of being a man in modern society and whatever the hell that even means. I'm Kane, and joining me this morning is Ryan. Or today, actually. It's today, but it's the morning in the UK and night over here in Melbourne. So, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, not bad. Indeed, it is the morning here. Although we flicked the daylight saving situation over here, so it's an hour later than it usually is. But I believe you guys will join us anyway in next weekend.
Yeah, I never know when we finish daylight savings if the clocks go forward or the clocks go back, but I think it gets lighter in the morning and darker at night. So I don't know what that means, but yeah, we realign next week.
We do, and neither did I until somebody told me yesterday, don't forget the clocks. And I'm like, it doesn't matter because iPhones are that smart anyway that they do it for me.
Exactly right. It's not like the old days where you had to, get the clock off the wall and turn the back of it, or go to every VCR or digital clock in the sort of the house and do it. I think even the clock in the car now updates itself. So there's very little to do now.
Depending on what kind of car you have, I would say. And you might have an old school car, but there is very little to do now. I did have to do the oven, but I did roll over because I didn't know whether I was going forward or back, and just give a Google of time in Melbourne. I was like, nah, I've got an extra hour to sleep. I'll go back to bed.
What is Sunday? You should be able to lane as long as you want.
Indeed.
Now, this evening, we are picking another question from the School of Life 100 Questions Conversation Toolkit. We went through a few beforehand. We've got a couple we'll keep for another time, maybe when Matthew's back, which will be a good one for him, and a couple of other ones, which will be quite short, given that we tend to agree and we're quite definitive on those ones. But the one we chose tonight is, are you where you wanted to be at this stage in your life? Which is a really interesting question because you're 30, I'm 41. So we're at different stages in our life to begin with. And everyone has a different definition of what they want out of their life. So I think it's a good question. And are you?
Yeah, it is a very interesting question. And I do think it's probably one, I guess the challenges for the modern man today is like, it's a really hard one. If you go back, 50 years ago, I dare say there was like a blueprint, shall we say, that potentially an 80-20 rule conform to, or something like that, which was, get a job, whether that be a trade or maybe do some studies, join a company, buy a house and raise a family. I think that's very different today. Very, very different today. And to be honest, it's different, but it hasn't nearly settled either. I think it's only going to become more different in the coming time. Am I? Short answer, no. Long answer, yes, I think.
Well, I dare ask the difference between the short and the long answer. Discuss.
Well, the short answer is like, if I think back and go, okay, let's say when I was 18, 19 or whatever, what did I think I'd be when I was 30? Well, I kind of thought probably would have maybe had a kid or two by now, be living in a house and potentially on that blueprint like that. I was probably, my parents were definitely advocates of said blueprint when I was growing up. Get good grades, go to university, get a good job, buy a house, all those things. Because I think that maybe they missed a few of those steps, and that those that did that were much more stable in terms of economically. So I think it's changed in that 10 years. So I probably thought I'd do that. I'd have a good job, family and house, and that was it. So that's why the short answer is no, because I don't have those things. The long answer though being yes is, I guess where I wanted to be was, I wanted to be leading, managing and doing something in business, which yes, by all accounts, objectively, I am. Maybe not as rich as I wanted to be, because I was quite driven materialistically when I was younger. That, though, has completely changed. So I think it's these changes that actually go, if I factor in these changes and I go, well, yes, because living overseas is one of the things that I wanted to do before, it's one of those like deathbed things of like you'd sit on your deathbed and regret that I didn't do. And for, like you said, other people have different barometers of what that is. But by all accounts, good and very successful roles in business, doing in health, which is positive because it's business that helps people as opposed to business that maybe destroys the planet. And I think on track for what I want or where I thought I'd be by this stage in terms of what I'm doing, in terms of maybe the friends that I have. But the big difference has been the possessions I thought that I would have at 30 is very much why the short answer is no. Because I don't have those things. So yeah.
What sort of things were they?
I think just that is, growing up in Australia, that Australian house,
And a
the
Commodore.
Australian dream, probably a Commodore, yeah. Probably an Australian Commodore with the Australian house. So things like I live over here without a car. And I would have thought at 30 I'd definitely have a car, probably a nice car. So I think yeah, going to the question, probably a few more extra dollars in the bank, a house and a car, really. And I don't have any of those that I am in centralized right now.
Yeah, but if you had have stayed in Australia as opposed to traveling, then you probably would have been much closer or achieved those. Yeah, so it's like hence your short answer is no, based on maybe what 20-year-old Ryan thought, but the long answer is yes, because in theory you could have had them. You've just chosen that they're not important to you right now.
Correct, and it's kind of like actually, does this change in that actually that stuff's really more important to me, where I thought that I would be, similar to your age, as opposed to, but when I was 20, 30 felt like it was really old, whereas now it's actually like, no. The one thing that is a no that I thought I would have done, and that I probably am hopeful to spark up and do, is do a real, I really just want to do a road trip around America. That's the one thing I would have thought that I would have done by 30 that I haven't. So hoping to keep that one through pretty soon.
Oh, once we can all travel again, you'd be getting pretty close to getting the vaccine over there now, wouldn't you? That UK are ploughing through people.
Yeah, half the population's had the vaccine. I'm unfortunately young, fit, and healthy, so I'm low on the list, but it won't be far, which is very exciting indeed.
We've just started having the rollout for over 65, I think. So my mother-in-law's in the gun, or in the syringe, so to speak, so she can book in the next 2 weeks. So they're starting to roll them out here, but it's been painfully slow, which is frustrating, I think, for a lot of people, because a lot of people see that as something that will make them a little bit more comfortable and confident in kind of going back to something a bit more normal. Although we are quite normal-ish here at the moment, anyway.
Yeah, the vaccine's rolling out really nicely here. And that's probably another thing in terms of the question of where you think even something like that has actually derailed. Where did you think kind of situation? Because it was like moving here and it was like, I thought I would have traveled a lot more. But I think you sort of end up rolling with those punches a little bit more. And that's where it's a really hard question to answer, because I think the goalposts change, and the goalposts probably should change. because as you get older and stuff, you hopefully get a little bit more wiser. So things change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess for me, I never had plans. Like again, we've gone through this on Daddy Eats Last on previous episodes where I'm not one to kind of draw up a master plan of what I want to do and where I want to go. If anything, I'm a bit contrarian. I kind of thumb my nose at the more traditional things like buying a house, family, that sort of stuff. It was never something when I was 20, I was like, oh, I've got to do that. That's something I'm really interested in. I didn't even really want a car, but I've got a car now. I've had cars all the way through, but a bit contrarian in that, they're not things which they weren't ever burning desires. And it's the same. Like I've never really had a grand plan on, this is what I want out of my life. I just kind of go through life. So I'd have to say that I am pretty close to where I'd want to be at this stage of my life. I have, I guess, financial and time freedom. Time freedom's a big one for me. It's always been big, is the freedom of time to kind of do what I want when I want. And if I had have stayed employed, which I would have been, probably coming up to 5-6 years ago, I left employment. If I had have still been employed now, that's probably where I would have thought I maybe wouldn't be at this stage. So the fact that I managed to do that 5 years ago and have managed to, touch wood, make that a success so far, because I think I'm almost unemployable now. I think that's probably the bit which is where I can say, yeah, I'm pretty close to where I'd probably like to have been at this stage in life.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you say you had no plans, but arguably you ended up with all those plans: a car, house, all those good things, a family. So that I find quite interesting.
Yeah, well, they weren't plans. They weren't like a thing to tick off. They were things which they weren't like I must do that. But things came along and things changed and things worked out really well. The only thing which I always kind of wanted to do was to start my own business as opposed to working for somebody. I think that worked out really well over the last 12 months with COVID, where, I'm an accountant by profession, and, some of the accounting firms last year were laying off 25% of their staff. And, theoretically I could have been one of those. So to be able to control my own destiny in some respects, in that, I wasn't at the whim of just being made redundant for, no real reason outside of partners to maintain their level of profits they like to take home themselves. That was anything that I've probably been consistent on since I was maybe 20, that I've actually, done. Everything else has been kind of a moving target to some extent.
Yeah, I think the time one's probably one where I would have thought like by now I would have wanted a lot more of that. I think I've got quite a bit of autonomy around it. But I think looking ahead, say into similarly your stage in life or whatnot, that becomes very, very important. Not so important to me right now, for a variety of reasons in terms of growth and so forth. And I think, like you said, the changes in the moving targets would, I do think, just evolve depending on what happens. And I think the pandemic has probably evolved a lot of them for a lot of people. I think my targets have become, following the pandemic, have probably become more centered around things that are important, like family, being engaged with friends and a community, and just having really interesting things to do.
Yeah, I think I got a guy that I didn't work with. I kind of did some conferences with him and heard him speak and those sort of things. So on the conference sort of circuit, when I was doing a little bit of that a couple of years ago, I think he put on LinkedIn, he said nobody died and on their tombstone has, I wish I worked more. It's always, I wish I spent more time with family. I wish I did X. I wish I did Y. So that kind of stuck with me. It was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And I just thought, at that stage I was, I'd been pretty good at, carving out time to, basically the freedom to kind of do what I wanted. And it kind of stuck with me. I thought, yeah, that's right. Like, time's a really important thing to be able to spend how you want it. And you can spend it however you want, but nobody ever died going, I wish I had spent more time working.
Yeah, and I think there's a really good book called, I think it's The Regrets of Dying or Something like that. We can
Sounds
put it in the
cheery.
show notes. Yeah, it is actually. It's a tough read at sometimes though, but it's about this palliative nurse, and she I think it was the 5 regrets of dying or something like that. And number one was, I wish I'd worked less. Not work less, sorry. The number one is I wish it was around that thing, and it's a really good book where this palliative nurse, she worked in, and palliative, for those who don't know, is care that you get, when you have a terminal illness, so you know that you're about to pass away, and a lot of these people thankfully were quite old, and this nurse would work with them and just really learn about their lives and what the regrets were or not were. And that one came through really strongly, is that you can't get time back. And that's where I think I'm trying to rack my head in terms of how do I chop out and get that time for 3 months to just road trip the US. Obviously, can't really do it right now in a pandemic. But that's probably the one thing of, if I thought I'd have that ability to do that now, I don't necessarily know that I do, for a variety of reasons. And that's probably the one difference that I would have thought I would have had by this stage.
Yeah, and again, like you mentioned before, that's been primarily dictated by the pandemic. If that hadn't have happened, you probably would have travelled most of Europe by now, booked that, climbed your mountain. That's on the cards now, isn't it? Potentially.
Yeah, booked for August, provided there's no 3rd, 4th major wave or some other strand or something, and the vaccine is in me and flowing. We'll climb Mont Blanc in August, which is one of those life things that will feel pretty damn good.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Hanging out for that. But I think one thing is, for those who might not be where they necessarily wanted to be or whatnot, and I think what we've worked out here is that it's just kind of don't beat yourself up, because 10 years ago you knows bugger all than what you know now, and the goalposts change, and there's not, people that go, I wanted to have $10 million or something like that. At the end of the day, like, they might have 20 million, and that's great, and the goalposts will change again, and they'll want 100, or it is a circular and evolving thing.
Yeah, and as we've discussed before, and I think it's your partner who came, who's told us this before, people kind of overestimate what they can do in 12 months, but grossly underestimate what they can do in 5 or 10 years. Like me at 30, I was a miserable bastard. So I've come a long way in sort of the 11 and a half years since. So if you want to change something, you don't have to change it now. There's time. Just make your plan. If you're a planning person, make your plan on what you want to change and then work towards it. Because it's easy to change over time. It's hard to change quickly, but it is easier over time to make the changes you want to, I guess, get where you want to get.
Yeah, and it's not, as much as people think it is too late, it's, I love the story of Colonel Sanders, where he started, not the KFC is great for the planet, but he started that at 67, and he was a failure all the way up until then. And by 70, he was a success. Now, that's obviously what he wanted to do. But that just constantly reminds me that actually people do have time if they act. It's the not acting that I think makes you the most frustrated with these things. Yeah. Hence booking Mont Blanc as soon as there was a light of the world opening up.
I love it. Well, I think it's a good place to wrap up for this week. Remember to subscribe to Dad Eats Last on iTunes. If you haven't done already, and while you're there, please leave a review. Also, tell your mates about the podcast, especially if they're male. Most of all, thanks for listening. I'll be back next week to climb another mountain, another episode of Daddy Eats Last. How's that for a dad joke? Catch you next week.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.